This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Would you agree with me that it's easy to become overwhelmed in general? If I'm honest, which I always try to be, it actually pains me that this reality is, well, a reality. But the truth of the matter is we're all a part of this brave new world where information, opinions, new ideas, and old obligations are hurtling at us with both unprecedented speed and in abundant volume. So what then do you do when it's your job to coordinate the implementation of innovation, of new solutions to old problems? With the wrong person or team in place, it could quickly become a case study in watching people go crazy as they attempt to absorb all the information about shiny new objects while effectively staying the course to roll out the technology or process that has been developed for the needs at hand. This is exactly what my guest for the 136th episode of the Terms of Reference podcast does day in and day out. Sean Blaschke is the ICT4D coordinator for UNICEF in Uganda, and as you'll hear in just a second, he has essentially an unlimited amount of stories about how implementing new practices can go wrong, but also what happens when you get it right. I spoke with Sean in Kampala. And hey, if this is the first time you're hearing the Terms of Reference podcast, or if you've been listening since 2014, please do take a minute to give the show a review on iTunes, because it really does help. And if you like what you're hearing, please share this with your friends and colleagues. Finally, if you're inspired, angered, plexed by what we talk about, please leave a comment on the blog. I answer all of them. Now, on to the show with Sean. Hello, Sean. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Hi, Stephen. Great to hear from you.
You and I have known each other for a while. I'm just going to come right out and say it. I worked with you. Gosh, it's been a year ago now, actually, in the office that you're sitting in right now in Uganda. Why don't you tell us, where are you sitting? What's the weather like today?
We're in the middle of a kind of unpredictable rainy season at the moment. Every day or two, we get a nice downpour, drenching everything, and then back to the warm, sunny days.
So you're saying that the climate change is a thing? It's not a thing?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to farmers here and you look at planting seasons, I've seen rather radical changes in weather patterns, even over the last decade here, which is making it increasingly difficult to predict issues like nutrition status amongst children because we don't know how the harvests are going to be like.
I'm glad that you've mentioned the last decade. You are currently Uganda's Technology for Development Coordinator and Health System Strengthening Specialist for UNICEF, which not only is a super awesome mouthful title, but it means that you're an implementer. You're at the heart of a lot of these ICT4D initiatives that UNICEF's putting forward, and there's been a ton of them in Uganda. And then you also kind of have a real timeline perspective of what UNICEF has been doing in the innovation space, which is something I'm excited to talk about. Explain in your own words, what does it mean to be the Technology for Development Coordinator? What are your day-to-day like?
So the coordination component is actually a relatively small part of my work. One of the things that we've been trying to do within UNICEF is to integrate both innovation and the use of technology across our programs. We really see all UNICEF staff, as a core competency needing to be innovative and needing to understand both existing digital tools as well as where the field is heading. So with my technology for coordination role, what I try to do is both expose colleagues in our country office to new ideas, emerging patterns and trends, as well as to work with them to apply the digital principles for development, in addition to ensuring that the systems that they're designing meet industry standards and ideally are interoperable in the larger systems that they operate.
So give us a success story. You've been there for a long time.
A little over 7 years, yeah. I'm a little bit of a abnormality within yourself.
Is there, point to one of the systems that you've worked on where you said, look, this is just a complete game changer. We not only really affected the way that assistance is provided, but we really changed people's lives.
Let me give you two, actually, if I can, if time allows.
I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
So one of our most successful programs was digitizing the birth registration process in the country. This started in around 2011. But if I can take you back about a year prior, when me and my colleagues first visited the Uganda Registration Services Bureau office, we were confronted with a very large room with a box bigger than I'd ever seen in my life. I didn't know they could even be produced that big, filled to the brim with papers, just dumped haphazardly in there. And these papers were birth certificates. They were long forms that had been filled out in paper, and there were four women outside the office who were typing them, manually typing them in, and another person that was typing it into a computer database. I think it was probably Access or Excel. We started to initially explore ideas of decentralizing this process, looking at data security and storage issues. They at the time said, look, this is very sensitive government data. We want it locked up in our office. We don't want anything online. Literally a week after that meeting occurred, somebody broke into their office and took the hard drives out of the computers that had the entire national birth registration records for the entire country for its history.
You've just confirmed my fear that if people want the data, they will get the data. I don't care if they have
exactly.
to. I mean, this is Watergate, right? They literally walked in and took the hardware. That's awesome. Gosh.
And because it was not encrypted, it was not in a place, it was not in a cloud, whether a local government cloud or whatnot, it was even easier to steal. And so this really changed the thinking and discussions around data hosting, data security, and using the cloud. And so from there, we partnered with Uganda Telecom and this government authority, the Uganda Registration Services Bureau, to develop a web platform for entering in and printing birth certificates. The reason why I say this is a success, we've only scaled this intervention up to about 65-70% of the country. Still big, but what we've seen nationally, when we look at the trends for birth registration at around 2010, 2011, they were somewhere between 25 to 30% of Ugandans. As of last year, nearly 70% of Ugandans now have birth certificates, with 3.5 million children alone being issued, moving it to the final 30% of the country that's not yet using it, and extending these services away from formal health facilities, town council clerk offices, sub-county chief offices, and actually down to the community, which we are planning on doing next year. I think we have a very good chance of reaching near universal coverage of birth registration, which would be, again, a massive achievement for this country in such a little time.
Wow, that's one success story. I mean, now I'm a little afraid. You've already thrown down a huge one. So how can you top that?
The area that I spend most of my time on is in the health system strengthening space. Now, UNICEF's health system strengthening global strategy, a couple of areas that are prioritized are strengthening decentralized management capacity to make evidence-based decisions, improving community health information systems, and being much more responsive to the opportunities that real-time data provide. Now, this is a very new strategy. Again, what I'm quite excited about is that we actually started to implement this strategy again about 5 years ago, before it was really embedded into our new program. We, working again with the World Health Organization and the Ministry of Health, we set up, building on existing systems, a tool called MTrack. At the time, disease surveillance and tracking of tracer medicines, those critical commodities, life-saving commodities that really are essential and required at all clinics, the information was being passed by paper. So you would have a rural facility 60, 70, 80 kilometers away from the district fill out this paper HMIS form every week. They would have to leave their health unit, and many of these health units, there might be only one or two people working there. So the health unit could, in many cases, would have to close for 1 to 2 days a week just to move a piece of paper to the district. Now, by the time the district entered in this data and sent it into the Ministry of Health for response, weeks and weeks would pass. We have some districts that have 80, 90, 100 facilities in them. And, you can imagine taking a talented biostatistician or epidemiologist and turning them into a data entry clerk and having to do analysis on, outbreaks of, say, cholera when they're getting the information weeks, if not months, after the outbreak occurred. So what we did was we mirrored, again, the existing approach. We coded the forms into SMS. We decided to do this rather than taking a tablet or smartphone approach because we found that introducing hardware adds untold complexities, pain points, and difficulties. And so what we determined was that every single health facility in the country, there was somebody there, some health worker had a mobile phone. So instead of providing new phones, fancier phones, we said, let's make the service completely free for everybody and have them submit this data via their mobile phones. What has happened in the last couple of years since then is that we've been able to scale this SMS reporting system to the entire country. This includes close to 4,000 health centers with, I think, about 62,000 registered reporters. We've integrated the system into the district health management system, a software platform called DHIS2, which is being used in over 50 countries, so that it's very, very seamless, so that the data, when it is sent on a Monday morning by the health unit, it immediately appears in DHIS2. Alerts are sent out for anything that passes a threshold. So one suspected case of viral hemorrhagic fever or Ebola, every district health official will receive that alert within seconds on their mobile phone. Other notifiable diseases have different thresholds. Measles, the threshold in Uganda is 5. And so, again, depending on the threshold, different SMS alerts are sent out. So this was our effort to move from a data-centered culture to more of a information management culture where people were responding to and reacting to information in near real time.
I'm glad you brought that up. I don't mean to interrupt there, but on the podcast, we've talked an awful lot about data, getting data, collecting data, analyzing data, big data, cloud data. And I love the distinction of moving from a data culture where writing figures on a piece of paper is collecting data, right? But it's really moving to the using information and being able to take action based on that information. That's really where we want to be, right?
Absolutely. And that's where our office is headed. I think we're in Uganda based on the investments that the government and partners have made. We're sitting on a gold mine of data. What's missing and where we're investing now in is turning this into actionable information and putting a layer of accountability above it to ensure that people are doing the jobs that they're hired to do. One of the things that we are investing in at the moment, now that we have this data in DHIS2, and what I was about to say is that just last month we reached the WHO gold standard for integrated disease surveillance and response of 80% reporting at the national level. And I believe Uganda is one of the only countries in the world that does have a fully digitized system that collects this IDSR data all the way down to the facility level, including private facilities, non-government facilities, and again, uses and responds to this information in real time. So what we've done over the last year is started to translate this data into management tools. And so as part of the global A Promise Renewed initiative and UNICEF and the Ministry of Health's sharpened RNMCH plan, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health strategy, we've started to build in scorecards, district level and facility level scorecards into DHIS2 using these key indicators so that the managers at the district, they can start to track progress against their own targets and national targets. They can identify whether they're improving or declining. And we've linked this to a bottleneck analysis tool where for every indicator, say your ANC, that fourth visit for an expectant mother to a clinic, which we see huge drop in. A lot of women come for their first visit. They do not come for their fourth. What we've done is been able to link these indicators in the scorecard to the determinants behind either the success or failure to them. The district health manager is now able to look at whether the issue is access to the health facilities themselves, whether it be geographic access or fees. They're able to look at human resources. Are they available? Do they have the correct training? They're able to look at the commodities to determine if that's there. We're implementing new programs at the community level that are going to give us unprecedented insight into the demand side, looking at initial utilization of services. Do women, do men, do they want to come to facilities in the first place? Continuous utilization. Are they coming back a second time, a third time? And then the quality of the services. And so this is a huge step in being able to help districts, help local government identify where their greatest challenges are and help guide them using an evidence-based approach to coming up with plans and interventions to address these bottlenecks.
I think it's clear to say that you're passionate about this. I mean, it's fantastic. I love that you not only are so adept with the details of the program, but you can thread the needle for us about where it started 7 years ago and where it's going today and where you're going to take it tomorrow. Speaking of 7 years ago, it's 2016 right now as we're recording this. 7 years ago, innovation was a word, but it wasn't the sort of ubiquitous buzzword in the development and humanitarian space that it is today. How did this get off the ground? What was it unique about either where you're sitting or the environment that you're in that sparked it and allowed these things to begin so that you were able to take these risks that people aren't normally able to take?
I think for UNICEF, one of the biggest steps was moving innovation out of the ivory tower in New York and headquarters and making sure that it was firmly entrenched at the country level where we work very closely with government. Many of the innovations that I had seen pre-2010, and I still see this, even in Uganda, the ivory towers in Kampala, they're developed in sterile situations, rooms by people who don't have any context to what the actual challenges the country face are. And this could even include, you see a shift to moving a lot of these accelerator programs, co-jams, to Nigeria, to Kenya, to Uganda, but we still have the challenge of the fact that the people who are engaging in these different challenges are often the elite in their own societies. Ugandans that have grown up in the middle or upper class in the city and maybe have never actually gone out to a rural clinic to experience what the real on-the-ground challenges are. And so I think that shift in 2009, 2010 to now, and it's a continuous shift, really, I think, helped us as an organization, as UNICEF, start to accelerate programs. To give you an example of this, back in New York, we had worked on a program called Our Stories. The idea was that UNICEF serves to help amplify and serve as the voice of youth. How did we traditionally do that before the advent of many of these modern technologies? Well, we would bring them, 2 children per country, fly them to a big conference in Brazil or the UK, and they would speak on behalf of the youth in their country. However, this wasn't very representative of the needs of all the youth in these countries. They often were token youth. And so we had begun to start to look at how do we actually capture what youth in these countries, what their real interests, what their real desires are. And how do we link that to government so government is more responsive in addressing this? And so in Uganda in 2011 seemed to be the year where a lot of our work started to really pick up speed. We launched a program called U-Report. We decided to move from voice to SMS. We partnered with, right now we have over 30 different partners covering everything from Barefoot Lawyers, who provides legal services, to Mary Stopes, who works on sexual and reproductive health, and have increased our U-Report pool in Uganda to about 300,000 people. So we send surveys and polls out, gather that pulse of the youth, Every member of parliament, for example, is also a U reporter, and we put together advocacy briefs targeting both national government as well as to be used by CSOs and by local government for much more localized needs. But we would not have ever come up with this U report tool, developing it solely in New York. Went through a number of different iterations, quick failures, until we finally came upon a process, a model that started to produce benefit. As of today, U-Report now is a global flagship program for UNICEF. It's in over 30 countries with over 3 million or close to 3 million U-Reporters globally on the platform.
Before you give an example, maybe you're going to answer this question. You said it's a global flagship program. So has that fundamentally changed the way UNICEF thinks about discovering where it needs to provide assistance, what assistance it needs to provide, and how it provides it? I mean, is it really cracking the UNICEF model as well?
Absolutely. So let me give two examples of how this has really changed the way that we work, as well as the way that government engages with its citizens. There was a youth entrepreneurial fund that was set up a few years ago in Uganda. UNICEF, working with government approached us and asked, what do the youth think about this? Do they think this is a great idea? At the time, I think we had about 50,000 or 100,000 reporters. We polled them, got a huge response back. I think 20, 30,000 youth responded in 24 hours. And a vast majority of them said the idea is great, but there is a O-level requirement that the vast majority of us who would benefit the most do not meet. Can the government please drop this? We brought this information to government, and within a week, they changed the fund. I had done a little bit of research afterwards and found that a number of NGOs had been advocating for the same thing for approximately 6 to 8 months with no success. So being able to harness that voice of the youth and say, almost petition style, here are 20,000 youth who say, please change this. And watching government respond, again, was an amazing thing to see. On the more global level, how does it change UNICEF? We did a really interesting experiment 2 years ago at the mHealth Summit in Washington, D.C. During the course of the summit, we sent out a poll to, I think at the time, about 500,000 Nigerian youth. What are the health topics that are most important to you? And during the closing plenary of the summit, we presented the topics that were being discussed at the summit. And we then compared that with what youth in the developing world, or at least Nigeria, felt were most important to them. And they did not align one single bit. There were a huge amount from the development partner side, a huge focus on the expected areas. There was the outbreak of Ebola, and so there were multiple sessions on that. There was a lot of talk around malaria, the principles for digital development, open HIE, and interoperability frameworks, all very important things. But youth in Nigeria shouldn't be surprising, but the number one topic that they thought should be addressed was sexual and reproductive health. Mm-hmm. I think there might have been a single session on that. What surprised me even more was the focus on non-communicable diseases and on things like cancer and diabetes, things that you would not normally affiliate with health issues, emerging health issues in a country like Nigeria. So that showed, I think, all of us that we need to do a little bit more listening and maybe take that expert part of our titles out of our name, because if we're really not responding to and addressing the needs that are coming from the populations where we work, then we have a little bit of self-reflection that we need to do on our side first.
So as somebody who's sitting in this coordination role on a day-to-day basis, and you've been in a country where you've tasted the fruits of success, right? Of, wow, we've come up with some solutions that have really been game changers. What are the frustrations? What are the barriers that you still kind of are experiencing on a day-to-day basis? Or maybe those have changed over the last 7 years, different kinds of barriers. What prevents you from either coming up with the new idea or implementing the new idea or even making an incremental change?
I would say institutional bureaucracy, and I'm not applying this only to UNICEF, but literally every partner we work with as well, whether it be government to international NGOs. We're really not set up to be able to try new things and to be able to fail. Failure is perceived as a huge no-no. You never want to write in a donor report that you tried something new and it failed.
Thanks for the $1 million. Didn't work.
But being able to approach it differently, approach it more iteratively. And so instead of being fixed into a rigid contract or rigid proposal where everything is spelt out for the next 3 years or 4 years, being able to test new ideas, to try new things, to build evidence around what works and what doesn't, and change that work plan with the donor, with the partner, with government to be much more effective. And so I think we're starting to move in that direction. But again, these institutional bureaucracies, I think, are still holding us back a bit.
So speaking of bureaucracy, you hold this coordination position in Uganda. Has the success, has the promise of what's happened in Uganda, has that now lit a fire globally for UNICEF? Or, I'm here in Thailand. If I go over to the Thailand country office today, am I going to find an ICT4D coordinator? They've said, wow, this is a way we want to move, or not so much?
I think UNICEF as an organization has changed quite dramatically since I joined in 2009 with the way they approach this. We've tested many different models out. The current model, we now have an Office of Innovation that sits under the Deputy Director of the Fields Results Group, and nodes throughout the world. I believe we have, again, close to 30 different innovation labs, hubs, or node. Every country comes up with a different structure, a different way they are implementing this. So you may not find a technology for development coordinator in Thailand. You might find a tech-savvy chief of IT that is providing guidance. You might find program specialists or planning officers that are taking this approach. Again, this is one of the organizational challenges that we're facing on how do we both mainstream innovation and technology, but at the same time put the right level of standardization and support that's required to ensure that we're protecting the rights of children. We're not exposing sensitive information to nefarious actors, but at the same time creating that space where people feel comfortable to be innovative.
I can draw on my particular experience in the project that you and I worked on together. One of the things was looking at M-Track, for example, as becoming a technology that could be shared, to use the innovation term, scaled globally for UNICEF. Is that still a want to have, or has that happened? Or is there a mechanism for you to be able to say, look, I've got the most awesome thing that we now know it works. We've proved it in Uganda here. You guys need to use this thing. And I guess one example would be UReport. How does that happen? How does it become that standard op?
So I think this is a great example of how we would take a successful country initiative to regional or global scale, because it's quite complex in the health space. And again, one system, one size doesn't fit all. And so we've been working closely with in the health space, the Open HIE community. This is a community that provides guidance on enterprise level health architecture, on standards, on interoperability, looking at where tools like M-Track would fit, and then building off of other tools that have a lot of momentum and critical mass. So going back to M-Track, I would say we're in the process of doing this, where we should be completing our upgrade on the technology stack, the software stack that M-Track is using to a tool called Rapid Pro, which we found to have a very, very large global uptake at the moment. We've re-architected M-Track into a set of modules, and we're working with the University of Oslo and the DHIS2 community to have M-Track basically be positioned as a mobile communications engine to expand and extend DHIS2 in ways that isn't in their core value proposition or areas that they wouldn't lead into. So
is that going to be like a co-marketing effort or something where somebody goes to the DHIS2 site and, as you're going to download it, they say, oh, by the way, you might also want to get this as your data collection tool or something like that?
I think it cuts both ways. We have many UNICEF offices who've been, have heard great things about M-Track, are looking for opportunities to use Rapid Pro in the health sector. But what we don't want is them to start pilot or siloed initiatives, collecting, using M-Track just to collect data on malaria. As we see health systems become much more mature and integrated, we need to make sure that these systems, again, are developed based on standards for interoperability. And so this is our attempt to package these two tools that have quite a lot of critical mass behind them and make them work out of the box. So when your nutrition officer in Malawi says, great, let me use this to collect data on severe acute malnutrition rates of children in these areas, we've already thought out how does this integrate in with the national health facility registry? How does this fit in with the healthcare provider registry? How do we get this data into DHIS2? Things that a nutrition specialist, likely has very little or no experience in and won't be thinking about at the time. And so by taking that thinking out of the equation, they're able to focus on that quality of service component or strengthening the nutrition services being offered, while at the same time making sure that the national health system is also being strengthened. So going back to the co-marketing, again, this cuts both ways. We're hoping to see countries using DHIS2 saying, great, what would be really great is if people could submit the data via mobile. That would really help here. And having a tool ready out of the box that they could download and configure locally and implement with very little technical support. And vice versa, those countries where UNICEF country offices are looking at that last mile, looking at mobile phones, but haven't thought about how they're going to link this into national systems that are well established. For that, those connections are ready to have been made.
Who funds this stuff at UNICEF? You said that the innovations now sit underneath a deputy head position. I'm sorry, I'm not recollecting exactly what you said about 2 minutes ago where it sits. But is this part of your core funding? Is this part of an endowment? Is this part of a fund? Do you build it into every program? How does that work?
So, Stephen, UNICEF receives funding from two primary sources. One is we have regular resources that come in as part of the UN dues. We also have what we call other resources. And these are resources that come from proposals and grants that country offices write, regional offices write. Sometimes innovative approaches are embedded in the proposals. Other times, regular resources are used to test this. And it really depends on the country and the situation. We really want to make sure that we're getting a strong return on investment. We need to make sure that we're not innovating for innovation's sake, that it is going to contribute to results for women and children. And we need to ensure that this is the most cost-effective way to achieving those results. So as part of our global, regional, and country office innovation strategies, there's a process for evaluating when do you try new things, how do you go about this, and when do you determine whether this is something to continue to invest on and scale or set aside and move on to something else. I also want to use this as an opportunity to quickly mention a new mechanism that UNICEF has put together to fund innovation externally. Very recently, an innovation fund was launched. The total funding within the innovation fund, I'm quickly looking for the numbers here. I believe initially we've put in about $10 million, $15 million. But the idea is that we would be taking kind of a venture investment approach to this innovation fund. So we've already made 31 investments in 30 countries. Now, these are small-scale investments. These are grants of $50,000, $100,000 to catalyze promising innovations, products for youth, real-time information systems, infrastructure, sustainable energy, with an eye on identifying which of these then could be integrated into our more traditional programming and taken to scale.
I love it. How long has the fund been around?
I have to check on the dates, but the actual innovation fund itself was, I think, launched last month or the month before. So very, very recently.
Wow.
The first wave of investments, we selected 5 startups, countries ranging from Bangladesh to South Africa. And the innovation fund is looking to invest in approximately 20 to 40 more startups next year. Now, again, this is being managed out of the...
Does it have a rolling application process? I know there's so many people who listen to this podcast that, funding is one of the things that perks their ears up. Is it just rolling, or do they have to apply by a certain time?
I believe it's rolling. I would encourage everybody to check the actual site, the application process. Again, this is, because it's being led out of the Office of Innovation in New York, it's something that we refer promising local innovators to, but the Uganda country office itself is not directly involved in any capacity on strategy or management of this innovation fund.
Usually on these interviews, I ask about what the biggest disruption you've seen is, or what are game changers. You've already put quite a few of those on the table, and literally things that have changed people's lives. I remember seeing the birth registration system, the VMRS system in Uganda, and having it dawn on me, a couple of weeks in, that it's such a game changer for someone when they don't have a birth certificate because they can't prove how old they are. They can't prove if they're a child. They can't prove if they're adult, all of these things, right? So massive disruption in that regard. What's your best fail? What's the one that, if we're going to sit here and have a beer, what's the story you like to tell everyone about? Oh my God, we did this one project and it was just a big stinker.
We've had a lot of programs that have not.
Oh, come on. You're doing that. Don't ever tell a donor you don't fail. Come on, I'm calling you on it.
No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you one of my fails. What I didn't want to do was present somebody else's fail on their behalf. So an early version of MTrack was meant to target community information systems. This was, launched in 2010, 2011, and we anchored this around the premises that the most important thing for a community health worker in Uganda to do their job effectively was access to a few core medicines, oral rehydration salts, amoxicillin, and ACTs, anti-malarial drugs. And so we didn't want to overload the system. We didn't want to collect a lot of data. We just wanted to make sure that these community health workers were active and that they were fully stocked. Now, upon launch, the system was very successful. We had reporting rates in the 90%. We had stockout levels at 1% to 2% per district. Everything was looking grand. I was seeing awards coming left and right, ready to come. And then what we found was that due to, again, some of these institutional bureaucratic issues, restocking of the community health workers in Uganda started to fail. One of the partners who had promised funds, the funding fell through, the orders were not made, and the commodities were not delivered. And as we started to see an increase in community health worker stockout rates, at the same time we started to see a decrease in reporting rates. And month after month, I sat in my office completely dejected, watching this trend to the point where
I have this great image of you sitting over a laptop. You're sort of, you're wringing your fingers. You're sort of. Yep. Go ahead.
It literally was that because I'm screaming, look, there are stockouts happening. But because of the way that the supply chain was set up, there was nothing anybody could do about that. It was an assumption that I had mistakenly made earlier that, look, if we can identify areas where there are stockouts, the system will fix that. Well, the system didn't fix it. We got to a point where we had about 90% community health workers reporting stockouts of essential medicines, and reporting rates had dropped from that 90% range down to about 6 to 7%. We had one of our implementing partners struggling to try to get the districts to use this data, to respond to it, but really forcing something that the districts, frankly, were not ready or able to respond to. At that point, working with our donor, we pulled the plug on the project completely because I was very concerned that we would lose the trust of community health workers with these systems for a full generation. If 5 years later we've addressed the supply chain issues, we have better technologies available, and we come back to them and say, hey, we want you to start reporting on drugs again. What I was very fearful was that they would look back and go, nope, last time we did it, you ignored us, and that led to the death of mothers and children. No, we don't trust your system. And so that trust factor is huge. And it was a decision that we made that we were better off at that stage reverting back to the much less effective paper-based systems than introducing a tool that, while the community healthcare workers were ready, the districts and the national level were not. So I'd like to use that as my example of one of our biggest fails, largely because I can take full responsibility for it rather than push the blame to somebody else, but also because I think it really also identifies a lot of the risks involved with innovating and pushing too quickly. These innovations have hugely disruptive effects. To give you another example of this, an NGO called MSH is rolling out a solution for commodities to improve forecasting, management of medicines and supplies. I recently visited a regional referral hospital that obviously had been trained and provided with the supplies probably a year prior, and the computers were still in their boxes. And as I started to probe, it turned out, and this was actually just after the State House's Health Monitoring Unit arrested the principal pharmacist for large-scale theft of medicines, was that he didn't implement these tools because it would shine accountability into the way that he was intentionally mismanaging medicines and commodities. Now, this is a glaring example of how technology can change things, but everything from, what do you do when you get that report in real time of a possible, case of yellow fever? Traditionally, you would go back, you might do an investigation. The whole process, the response time, the way that this information was dealt with, and still in many cases continues to be dealt with, is based on an assumption that the data is old and that you can't respond or address in real time, which you can. And so we've started to see that change. For example, in Uganda with MTRAC, a year ago, even 6 months ago, 7 cases of cholera would be reported. Maybe that was a mistake, maybe it wasn't, but the Epidemiological Surveillance Department and Emergency Operations Center would go about their normal process of investigation. Now, within literally minutes of this report coming in, there is contact with the entire district health team and local government, and ministry is now demanding an immediate response. Go out. Was this report true? Was it not true? Go in, correct your data if it's wrong. These are gradual shifts that we're starting to see as people realize that the way that they've been going about business for their entire careers is being changed radically with the ability to collect, gather real-time data from citizens, from facilities, being able to tap into big data exhaust, looking at other alternative data sources like right now we're starting to look into mobile money, not to transfer funds, but as a way to look for shocks to the system, whether these be food shocks, disasters, looking at the status, vulnerability status of individuals. And what we're starting to see is that we can see this with the patterns of where mobile money flows. Is it coming from the center outwards or outwards in? And what increments are people sending? Small amounts of money, big amounts of money? and how much are they keeping on their mobile wallets? Are they saving and investing, or are their savings accounts or mobile money accounts starting to run dry? And so we're in a really unique time period where there's, again, just so many sources of data, and the real challenge is how do we make sense of this and turn this into an opportunity to allow not just government but citizens of these countries themselves to make informed, evidence-based decisions about their lives.
So I only have two more questions for you. And they're the same two questions I ask pretty much everybody on the podcast these days. And the first one is, you're clearly in the thick of it in Uganda. You have been there for 7 years now. This is something that you're passionate about. Who do you pay attention to make sure that you stay on top of things? Do you read blogs? Do you read magazines? Is there a government publication you check out? What is it that you use to make sure that you're fresh and you're on the edge?
So I subscribe to a number of Gmail listservs. I regularly check UNICEF, the World Bank, other innovative blogs that they produce. ICT Works is another great blog that I follow very, very regularly. I often find that a lot of these resources, again, are just, they're echo chambers. They repeat what they've heard from somebody else, who repeats what they heard from somebody else. And I found that ground truthing these potential innovations is far more effective. And so I try to participate in as many of these local code jams, hackathons, accelerators as possible. Now, I have issues with them. I think the way that many are structured don't necessarily lead to transitioning innovative ideas into initiatives that can either sustain themselves, be integrated, or scale. But there have been a few cases where programs have taken off, and I think a lot of the organizers of these various code jams, hackathons, have really learned a lot of lessons. And I'm seeing many of the newer ones coming up. For example, in Uganda, UNFPA just partnered with an innovation business incubator called Outbox with a program called Up Accelerator. They really understand where the failures have been in the past and are pushing for solutions that don't look great on paper, but 6 months later fail to exist, but are taking these principles for digital design, applying them to the accelerator, and looking at how do we actually identify where the real problems are and come up with innovative solutions to address this. We need to dispel this myth that within 48 hours the next Facebook could be created and you'll be a billionaire. That's not the way innovation works. If you look at the average age of successful innovations, I believe it's in either the late 30s or early 40s, and it takes understanding business. It requires having a broad network of connections. These are not things that a 21-year-old, 22-year-old straight out of university will have. And so making sure that we're providing them with an environment where they can be successful with the skills that they currently have and continue to grow, that's, I guess, I've kind of tangented away from the question on where do I get my information. But that is where I get, I think, for me, my best ideas is from youth who are actually hacking away and testing out, trying, failing, and sometimes succeeding.
We'll close this interview out by, you've already mentioned, unfortunately or fortunately, 20 different technologies and innovations that you think they're fantastic out there. Is there one that you don't get to work on every day? You focus on the health systems. Is there one out there that you don't work on that you'd like to give a shout out to that you think is either just super cool, I mean, this is a moment to geek out, or one that you actually think is others need to pay attention to because it's going to have real impact?
This is actually a pretty tough question because I'm fairly passionate about being technology agnostic. And so I really push for standards over individual tools, and I push for building off of what is already there. The best tool, and this is a challenge that we face again and again with working with software companies and engineers, is that the best design tool used by one person isn't going to be as effective as a moderately well-designed tool used by millions. And so perfection in code, perfection in tools should be shied away from. Simplicity should be targeted. That said, looking at tools that I think really will take off over the next few years that UNICEF and myself are not affiliated with. In the health Android space, there's a tool that WHO and Johns Hopkins has been supporting called OpenSRP. The reason why I like this tool so much is that they've really taken, again, this interoperability approach where they can plug in and plug out of many, many much more mature tools in this ecosystem. There's a pilot going on in southern Uganda that we're looking to see if we can incorporate in called Mama Rescue. This is being led by a number of organizations, including Yo Uganda, MTN, USF, and Baylor. And this is using mobile money payments to support the transfer of expectant mothers from their villages to health facilities to give birth. This is really exciting because I think, again, the mobile money space, we barely scratched the surface with the potential of this. And it addresses a huge need. If you look at the three barriers to accessing healthcare, that access to services is a huge one. And if we can put in a mechanism, replace a lot of the much more manipulable paper-based voucher systems with digital tools, I think we can see incredible cost savings, greater accountability, and as a result, much better results.
Sean, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Stephen, it's always a pleasure to chat.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from Aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.